Hello, everybody, and welcome to Queer Disruptions. It's really fantastic to see everybody here today, and I'm so grateful that we're able to have this conference. I'm Yasmin Ergas, and together with Alondra Nelson, raise a hand, Alondra, right, Dean of Social Science at Columbia University, we together co-chair the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Council. And I'm also the director of the Gender and Public Policy Specialization at the School of International Public Affairs. And I'm delighted to be welcoming everybody here today. So it's wonderful to see you all in what we hope very much will be a landmark conversation, one that will not lead us all to the same perspective or the same point of view, but will allow each one of us who's come here to present our own, often particular and divergent perspectives, and come away challenged in our interests and also in our underlying certainties. This conference celebrates queer scholarship and advocacy. To many, it may seem a matter of justice, making space on the university's big stage, and what better than this stage of the Casa Italiana, for voices that too often have been marginalized and barely heeded, treated as irritants and not interlocutors of serious academic discourse. But justice is actually never simple, because it is never only additive. It does not leave basic structures untouched. It's inherently transformative, and perhaps never more clearly than in this case. Queer thought, scholarship, and practices have shaken the foundations of obviousness in our societies, calling into question the binaries that have more or less precariously and always as sites of contestation, but nevertheless with an appearance of solidity, organized social, cultural, and political life. We should note, therefore, or I note, the bravery and the daring of so many of those who will be contributing to our discussions today and tomorrow, and who have enabled us, really, to develop the groundwork for this conference, and who have made the next 2 days possible. Many people have contributed to making the conference possible, and I would like to thank them all. I ask you to bear with me if by chance I've inadvertently omit someone. But thank you first of all to the Casa Italiana for hosting us in this wonderful setting. Thank you to Alondra Nelson, my co-chair, who truly has shouldered far more than her fair share of this endeavor. Thank you to all the members of the program committee, Rachel Adams, Walter Bochting, Melanie Brewster, Catherine Ewing, Suzanne Goldberg, Jennifer Hirsch, Sharon Marcus, Dennis Mitchell, Vani Natarajan, Richard Parker, Veena Tran, and Sarah Whitty. I want to say a very special thank you to the remarkable Veena Tran, who combines intellectual and diplomatic acumen with artistic creativity, see the poster, website savvy, and organizational leadership. Truly, whatever else, we certainly wouldn't be here without Veena. Thank you also to Ana Gabriela Gonzalez and Mina Tajrishi for their organizational help, to Adina Barrios Brooks, Director of the Provost's Office of Diversity and Inclusion, also for all of her help. But most especially, I want to say thank you to former Vice Provost of Academic Planning, Andy Davidson, and to Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion, Dennis Mitchell. It is to Vice Provost Mitchell unflagging support and indeed vision for this conference that we owe the possibility of being here today. And so I'm especially delighted to start the conference by introducing Dr. Dennis Mitchell, Vice Provost for Faculty Diversity and Inclusion, and Senior Associate Dean for Diversity for the Columbia University Medical College of Dental Medicine. In his role as Senior Associate Dean, Dr. Mitchell is responsible for the Dental College's diversity programs targeted for underrepresented minority student enrollment and development. As Vice Provost, our direct beneficiary, he is patron, I should say. He is responsible for leading the university's ongoing commitment to attract, advance, and retain a diverse faculty. Dr. Mitchell implements the program elements of the university's major commitments to enhance the diversity of the faculty and works with leaders of each of Columbia's schools to evaluate and strengthen their diversity initiatives. And in addition, he chairs the Provost Advisory Council for the enhancement of faculty diversity. Truly, I want to say that without Dr. Mitchell, we would not be able to have this conversation. So it gives me enormous pleasure to welcome you to address us today. Thank you.
Good evening. It's just a pleasure. I am so thrilled with the turnout this evening and for tomorrow. It's beyond our expectations, so we're grateful to all of you. And in particular to Yasmin and Alondra, thank you. My partners in this as we've tried to figure out how to bring this conversation to the university and ultimately to the nation in a scholarly way. So I'm grateful. Please forgive me. I do have some words I'd like to share, so humor me. But ultimately, we're very proud as a university to host this major cross-campus conference focused on queer studies. Congratulations to the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Council, which of course is a network of our centers, institutes, and initiatives for Columbia University dedicated to women's gender and sexuality studies, as you know, co-chaired by Alondra and Yasmin. Queer Disruptions is a part of Columbia's LGBTQ diversity initiative, sponsored by the Office of the Provost and launched this past year. In addition to supporting events like this, we are funding a group of proposals for 4 new faculty positions dedicated to LGBTQ scholarship through a university-wide competition. One in religion, focused on the intersection of religion and gender, sexuality, and studies. One in history, with a focus on history of sexuality. One in nursing, with a focus on lesbian and bisexual health. And we're thrilled to welcome the 4th of these recruits, Jack Halberstam. Who's Jack? There he. Currently a visiting professor in English, who will be a part of the Queer Disruptions program over this evening and tomorrow. The event reflects Columbia's long and rich tradition of debate and research on these themes and its commitment to the field. We are fortunate to have major scholars in this area on our faculty. In addition to Jack, that includes Professor Tay Meadows, sociology, Catherine Frank, law school, Walter Bachting, nursing and psychiatry, Mignon Moore, Barnard, Melanie Brewster, Teachers College, Catherine Ewing, religion, Rachel Adams, English, and Patricia Daly, English. They will also all be participating in the conference over the next day and a half. We are delighted that so many esteemed institutions will take part. Their cutting-edge research has produced provocative, paradigm-shifting work, which has led to intense debates. Queer studies, politics, and practice have upended assumptions that range from the binary nature of sexual identities to the functions and importance of marriage as a social institution. Collective conversations in all spheres of intellectual endeavor, from medicine to sociology, from the visual arts to technologies of reproduction, are different because of these contributions. This conference will explore the divergent perspectives that have emerged around 4 key issues: marriage, disabilities, vulnerability, and resistance, and the current conversations between feminism and trans scholars and advocates. The Office of the Provost is proud to support this conference and hope that you enjoy the next day and a half. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, Dennis. And so now we're ready to start with our keynote panel. And in order to introduce that, I would like to introduce the moderator of the keynote, Juana María Rodríguez, who is Professor of Gender and Women's Studies and in the Performance Studies graduate group at UC Berkeley. She's the author of 2 books, Queer Latinidad, Identity Practices and Discursive Spaces, and also Sexual Futures, Queer Gestures and Other Latina Longings, and has published many articles related to her research interests in sexuality studies, queer activism in a transnational American context, critical race theory, technology and media arts, and Latin and Caribbean studies. Latina.
Thank you all so much. It really is my great pleasure to open the Queer Disruption Conference by moderating this exceptional panel of talented visual artists and activists. I'm going to begin just by offering very brief framing comments before introducing the panelists. And then after they've all spoken, I'll begin the Q&A and then open it up to all of you for further discussion. When we encounter an image, we bring to that moment a rush of both intellectual speculation and heart-pulsing emotion, each element twisting and disrupting what we think, know, and feel about the faces and places staring back at us. We might speculate on the production of the image, the staging or the inspiration behind its creation. We might wonder about its craft, all the creative forms of touching and fondling involved in its making. But images also possess the ability to disrupt our encounters with our own sensing bodies, to conjure memories of other sights and sounds, to summon the traces of violence and tenderness that we carry with us. This reckoning with the power of images to not only tell stories, but to make us grapple with their effective impact is at the very heart of these works that these artists will be discussing today. Each offers us an opportunity to disrupt our ways of knowing and to awaken queer ways of seeing and sensing the worlds around us. So I'm going to introduce all of the panelists and then we will begin. Our first panelist is Mariette Pathy Allen. Her first book, and her books are all here. Her first book, Transformations, Cross-Dressers and Those That Love Them, is a portfolio of portraits of cross-dressers made in the 1980s. And I think the second part of that title, and Those That Love Them, was particularly salient in the 1980s. The simple assertion that trans people are worthy of love. Her second book, Gender Frontier, was published in 2003 and won Lammy in the transgender, genderqueer category. And her most recent book, Trans Cuba, which begins with an introduction by Mariela Castro, no less, includes both stunning color photographs and compelling interviews of transgender Cubans. Mariette's newest work, Spirit Mediums in Myanmar and Thailand, is forthcoming in 2017. Our next speaker is Darren Dean. He is an award-winning producer of the 2015 feature film Tangerine, a film about Black and Latina trans sex workers in Los Angeles that is also really one of the most beautiful films about friendship and queer kinship that I've ever seen. Along with Sean Baker, the director of Tangerine and one of his longtime collaborators, Dean also produced and co-wrote Prince of Broadway and the Clio-winning Snowbird. In 2011, he produced the Sundance Award-winning feature, Kinyarwanda, which won him an NAACP Image Award nomination. Our final presenter is Zanele Muholi, a photographer and self-proclaimed visual activist whose portraits of Black South African lesbian and trans subjects are collected in the book Faces and Phases. Her portraits exude the fragile beauty and powerful resilience of queer Black life in South Africa and are stop you in your tracks stunning. Her work forcefully speaks back to the brutality of what has been termed corrective rapes, the heinous practice of violent sexual assault against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and gender-variant people to cure them of homosexuality, crimes frequently committed by family and acquaintances, often ending in murder. Muholi's text counters this brutality with soul-searing, life-affirming portraits that radiate a haunting presence, demanding a political reckoning with the complexities of queer life in contemporary South Africa and beyond. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists.
I want to thank Columbia University and everybody who has worked to create this conference. I'm honored to be here, and I particularly want to thank Walter Bochting for getting me here. And so I have put together a PowerPoint exhibition here, and I unfortunately can't stay sitting there as I have to see what I'm doing. So I want to begin by telling you that my art is informed by my experience as a painter, which is how I began as an artist. And the other part of it is my incredible curiosity about how people choreograph their lives and other cultures. And so when I, by fluke, came across a group of transgender people in 1978 in New Orleans on the last day of Mardi Gras, my life really changed. I felt a connection, a really surprising connection, although I don't identify as transgender myself. I feel very close to a lot of the feelings and concepts that people who are gender variant, gender non-conforming, gender fluid, the whole range experience. So I want to just also add, because this is such a short time for a presentation, every slide you see will represent an aspect of the evolution away from the non-binary to the queer celebration that we have and beyond. Okay, so I'm responsible for doing this. Okay, can you see this with the way the lights are? Yep. Okay, well this image was taken at 6 o'clock on a Sunday morning in the middle of a drag show. Raquel was coming up for a breather. And to me, this picture is what you would consider a classical binary image, except that there's a little secret in it. This is the image, the exact moment when I encountered trans people for the first time. This was taken after breakfast. By fluke, I stayed in the same inn where they were staying, and I came down for breakfast and saw all these people, and they said, "Would you like to join us?" And I thought, why not? After breakfast, they started parading around the swimming pool, and then they stopped in their tracks, and somebody else started taking pictures, and I thought, well, I wonder what would happen if I took a picture. And I did, as you can see. You notice that everybody is looking in different directions except for the person right in the middle looking straight back at me. As I took that picture, I thought I was looking at somebody who was not a man, not a woman, but somehow the essence of a human being, a soul, if you will. And I said to myself, as I took that picture, I have to have this person in my life. That person turned out to be a wonderful, very creative person named Vicki West, who lived 20 blocks away from me in New York City. And it's through that one person that I'm still deeply involved with issues of gender nonconformity and variance. Okay. Right in the beginning, now I'm speaking about the 80s. I'll be speaking about the 80s for a while. This was at an event called Fantasia Fair, which is one of the longest running transgender conferences in the world. It takes place annually in Provincetown in October. And this is Betty Ann and Michelle at a beauty parlor, and they are out in the world. I mean, up till then, there were very few people who were willing to set forth out of a closet or out of their hidden bedrooms. And this is also at the same conference at the Unitarian Church, where you see Maxine, Ariadne, and Virginia Prince. The whole issue of religion, which is still a major issue, was very traumatic for so many trans people because they thought they were guilty and sinful and evil and freaks, and the whole range is of going to church was something that was very moving to people when they could go in, and they often were crying in church. This is Virginia Prince, who you just saw a moment ago, who I think in some ways could be responsible for major change in thinking, and very comforting to a lot of trans people. I'm simplifying. I'm not going to say gender variant, gender nonconforming, etc. each time. So when I say trans, please don't be offended. The Virginia Prince reasoned that there were really three aspects to a person. There's the physical anatomy, the sexual orientation, and the gender identity and expression of a person, and that they could be as unbelievably varied. And I think she was a precursor to what we are talking about now, about the range of human beings who can fit under the enormous umbrella of queerness. Next. I don't know what happened. Back. There. Sorry. I don't know whether it's you or me who are doing this. This is Ariadne Kane, who's the other person you saw in the last picture. And starting way early, possibly in the 60s or 70s, she identified as an androgyne, which is not a word you hear now, but I think she would be perfectly comfortable going to your classes. She would fit in right away because of that understanding already then. So one of the things that I wanted to do right from the early on was to take trans people out of the position that most of society saw them in as solitary, dangerous, perverted, and unlovable people, and show them kind of in the daylight of everyday life in relationships with spouses and children, which was a huge issue for many people. There were endless conversations about when should we tell the children, should we tell the children, and it was an enormous opportunity for me to be able to show transgender people with children. I'm going to show you just a few different people who I met in the 80s. This is Felicity, who at that time was in her 80s, and although hidden, she was also right there on the wall. This was a picture taken by Little John's father of John and his mother, and a beautiful picture and blown up on the living room wall. And John was around 12 when he happened to go in the attic and came across a series of pictures, and it brought back some memories and some intense feelings. And it's when he at the time said his cross-dressing started. This is Vanessa, who grew up in a barrio in Corpus Christi, Texas, didn't know anything about people like herself, happened to see somewhere in some book a message about Fantasia Fair, drove hell-bent just to get to there, had nothing with her really, had no clothes, no money, and was ecstatic the whole time. But when it was over, I was afraid she would have a meltdown of some kind, so I brought her to New York. This picture was actually taken in New York City. Whoops. No. I don't want to give you a preview. Okay, this is okay. This is Sherry, and one of the issues also, I'm still 80s and even much earlier, was the issue of sexuality and fetishism and corsetry, lingerie, big deal. And I show this image because as kind of an introduction, the fantasy that we created, we went around the room and hung things and brought things, and she's actually on the cover of Transformations. Not that image though. Anyway, so that leads me to the kind of underground. This is Bob Melinda. And while everybody else was trying to behave as if they were just regular citizens, and Bob Melinda was disrupting that idea secretly and on her own. And she had her gender and sexuality, sexual orientation changed constantly. I have about 12 images, but I'm only going to show you a few. What?
You need to kind of wrap up just a little.
Have I spent 10 minutes already?
12.
Oh my goodness, what am I going to do?
And we can keep talking during Q&A. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to. Oh, it keeps running. Okay, this is another story I need to tell you. There was a lesbian couple in Chicago named Peggy Sue and Linda. They moved from Chicago to Pompano Beach, Florida. When there, Peggy Sue decided, or not decided, but felt she needed to be a man. She transitioned to become Maxwell. After a while, the same thing happened to Linda. So they went from being a lesbian couple to a gay male couple. Then, after about 12 years, Jake fell in love with a woman in California and left Maxwell, who then was devastated and moved to Atlanta to be with more people like himself, got into a master-slave relationship with another female-to-male transsexual. And then in Atlanta met Carissa, who was a drag artist, male to female drag artist, And so they were now a heterosexual couple. And that relationship lasted quite a while until Carissa left and wanted a cis man. And then Maxwell found a cis man himself. And then he died. So can I keep going for a little longer? Shall I just show pictures and not say another word?
Why don't you think you can wrap up in about another minute and a half?
No, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
I'll just show you pictures. Okay. I think that's what I have to do because every picture deserves commentary, but you'll have to figure it out for yourselves.
And the books are here, and so afterwards, during the reception, I'm sure people can come and engage these images with greater reflection.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay.
I think we're going to show the trailer, right?
Wonderful. Do you want to introduce that?
Sure, the trailer to Tangerine.
Yes.
It's simple.
Hey, Alexander. Listen, have you seen Cinderella? Looks like someone has a crush. Cindy's back on the block? Oh yeah, she's back. She's back and she's going hard. Merry Christmas, bitch. I got something to tell you about me and Chester. I know what it is. You're breaking up with him. Thank God. I'm gonna be cheating on you like that. Wait, what? You didn't know? White. Who is she? Her name starts with a D. Danny. That's right. Destiny? You're making me lose my name. She's some white fish. I think she don't mean a real fish. Yeah, bitch, like a real fish, girl, like vagina and everything. Girl, calm the fuck down. It's not that serious. I will go with you under one condition. You must promise me that there's not going to be any drama. I promise. Look at me in my eyes and promise. I promise no drama. There's a job. You didn't have to Chris Brown the bitch. What did you do to her? Does your friend never show up? No, that bitch been talking ever since I met her. Why does he owe you money? We made a business transaction. You're not even hard yet. Fucking hard. That's hard. Chester. Simpson. Who's your man? Who's talking to you? Cindy, what do you see in him? Talk to me. We've been out of jail for 24 hours. She's not causing drama. She called in the police. The cops are coming. Come on, Rob. Out here, it is all about our hustle. And that's it. This motherfucking girl thing.
So, I guess I'm supposed to talk a little bit after that. The journey of this film has been really, really incredible for us. We've been all over the world with it, and it's created tremendous opportunities for our actors, as well as us as filmmakers, and it's opened up a lot of really great conversations. I don't think that there was any point when we were making the film that we thought we were going to be any kind of trendsetters or anything like that. The whole bandwagon-y aspect of, Caitlin coming out and things hadn't started yet. And so we were making a social realism film about people that Sean Baker, the director, had met and really wanted to shed a light on. One of his approaches is trying to shed a lot of light on people who we step over in society. And let's face it, the trans community has been stepped over and stepped on for years. So we wanted to take this opportunity opportunity to, to explore the folks out in this area of Los Angeles. One of our big concerns when we first, made the film, and we can, certainly talk about this later, was, obviously we're portraying trans women of color as sex workers, and there's comedic relief, and those are two tropes that, frequently, trans women land in, and when they have TV roles and film roles. So for us it was we wanted to be very cautionary about how we approached what many would consider a stereotype. And we wanted to approach it, as loud and in your face as that, may seem. We wanted to approach it with the same love and sensitivity that, that your work does. And so one of the things that was really important to us during the process of, immersing ourselves in the trans community in Los Angeles was shedding a light on the fact that it's not that much of a stereotype. You go out to LA and trans women of color are left with really no alternative but to walk the streets. It's how they survive. And Maya went on 67 job interviews in 1 month and was rejected from all of them because she, her face and her identity did not, match what was on her identification. And, unfortunately, it's not a, master-slave relationship, but, but women are forced, and these women are forced into this line of work out there. And that's a conversation that just really needs to be had with, with our lawmakers, because unfortunately, in many states, it's still perfectly legal to discriminate against trans people. And as, so we wanted to portray that as something that is a discussion point, and a movement towards change. And as far as the, the comic relief element of it, that really came from our girls. I mean, Maya said to us right off the bat, she said, this is a hard life to get through if you don't laugh at it. This movie better be funny as fuck. And so we abided by her, request, and, and worked very, very closely with them to make sure that this film accurately portrayed their experiences on the street. And they both have been very, very open about, having worked the sex trade in Los Angeles in the media. And so that's where this film came from. And I'm excited to talk about it a little bit with you guys and, and my fellow panelists.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I don't know, can you hear me? Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm just seated here thinking what to say, how to say it in less than 20 minutes after practicing as a visual activist for more than 15 years. It's sad, but one needs to strategize. I'm not going to give you or go in depth into what is towards South African visual history as such, but I'll just cut it short. My journey is simple. I identify as a lesbian, and I've seen a lot of my friends transitioning from one space to the next, or from one gender to the next, or sexuality to the next. So I'm speaking as an insider within the LGBTI community, not from outside, and understanding the challenges that people are facing as they go through so many, harsh periods. So this is a slideshow that I've prepared just for this, and it features mainly work that I've produced in a period of 10 years, the before and after of people that are my friends and friends of friends and acquaintances who are South African citizens, where laws allow us to be who we want to be, but the reality check is there's so much violence, and hate crimes are a reality, and a lot of people have been displaced and violated or brutalized simply because of who we are. So for this timing period, I just picked very, very few images. Obviously, they extracted from a number of portraits. There are more than 500 and then 250 of them form part of Faces and Phases, which is a series of black and white portraits, much spoken about or written about by many academics. And I work with a lot of youngsters who are in the project. So there's no outside, inside, whatever. For me, I believe that empowerment is the key, and in which we speak about like ongoing activism. There's just no use for me to photograph people and yet at the same time there's nothing for them. So I work with a collective called Inkanyiso. We continue to train members of the LGBTI community, starting with the people who are featuring in the series. And Lerato, who is at the back there, is one of them. So for most of my movements, I also co-present with participants in my work, which I decided to drop the word subject because I don't want any objectification, subject of any kind. These are human beings who are members of my community. They're part of me, so they can't be subject. So I'm doing the whole photography language terminologies that I don't know who came with them into this space. So we're gonna roll, and then I'll be here to respond to your questions. Honestly, I just cannot do injustice into what I've done for a long period just to screw it in 15 minutes. So here are the images. My practice is simple. I'm trying to write a South African visual history. At the same time, visual activism becomes the major thing in what I do. And then I'm creating a visual archive. So I just realized some time ago that it just doesn't make sense to rely on mainstream media to define us. We live in spaces where people think that, okay, it's okay to write about LGBTI issues because people are there. But the truth is, the outsiders do not know what's going on. And it's okay if it's a collaborated process. If we work together to define us, it's okay with me. South Africa changed a lot of laws in the past. We are celebrating 22 years of democracy this year, and we're celebrating 20 years of South African Constitution from 1996 till now, and 10 years of the Marriage Civil Union Act of 2006. So all of those movements happened, and in my headspace I thought, you cannot change the laws without changing the visual. It's very important when you talk gender and sexualities and bring forth the visual, because that's where we start to speak. So human beings like me then became that major, element in all of that commotion and the Constitution that is much celebrated by the people of the world. And then I self-represent, which means I have an understanding of politics of self-representation, because that whole thing of like being inside and outside, and also not knowing what to say about your being inside, became something else. I collaborate with a lot of the participants, as I said, and then participation then is key for those who consent to be part of this project, meaning that you have to sign a consent form, you have to agree that you participate, because you shall be seen. It doesn't make sense if people were to be involved in a project where they don't know where it goes. And then collectivism forms part of my activism. So we're doing it together because it's about our lives anyways. So for more about people's lives, and if you want to know who is doing what, there are life stories that are accessible through Inkanyiso, and I've posted a story of one of my friends who transitioned, who's been through the process for the past 3 years. And I've known that person for more than 12 years. Faces and Phases is a 10-year project. We celebrated the 10th anniversary of the project on the 15th of September. And most of the people who are in my photographs, they have names and surnames. I know most of them, of which I really appreciate with how you presented your work. Knowing the people who are in your photos is very important. This is Karabo, before and after. The image is 4 years apart. The image on the left was taken in 2012, and the image on the right is taken in 2016. And he's written his own story, which is available on Inkanyiso, the link that I just gave you. He's a friend. We met 12 years ago. He's a survivor of hate crime and has written in his own story, not that somebody's writing on his behalf, but he has written his own story. This is Nkunzi Nkabinde. He has penned a book, a very beautiful book called The Black Bull. It touches on the subject of being a traditional healer and how he, as a traditional healer, received a calling of a man, and how that man who possessed him for a long time speak to him as a man than what Nkunzi used to be. The book is accessible. This was published by Chakana. You could read it for yourself. It fits well with within literature, yeah. And this is before he transitioned, and the picture on the right-hand side is after transition, and the image is taken at Constitution Hill, where the Constitution was amended in South Africa. He lives 5 away from my place. That's him on the right. Okay, right. The challenges. Whoa, sure. And this is TK in 2012 and TK in 2016. We go to the same church, which is headed by a trans man. I don't know if this mic is on. Can I continue though?
Yeah.
Okay. TK, we go to the same church, which is called VMCI. It's Victory's Ministry International Church, which is one of the gender churches in Durban. Most of the church members are lesbian men, if not trans men, if not gender non-confirming, and the church elders are dressed as men. They have their own children and wives. That's the church where most of the queer people get married. And the pastor of the church is also one of us. So I've been documenting the church for the past 4 years. And TK is one of the church leaders there. And then we have my lesbian friends who are part of this mission, who've been married to lesbian men and trans men. And it depends on how people define themselves within their own family settings. And Ayanda got married in 2013 on the 9th of November. She's one of the most respected community members, and she solved the issue or the case of Duduzozo, who was brutally murdered in Thokoza Township in 2013. I guess when tragedy hits home, some of our activists make sure that they are at the forefront and they deal with the family and they help to ensure that people are comfortable as much as possible. So Ayanda was that person. This is, Ayanda is a lesbian mother. Then this is Shemaine, also, who's a lesbian mom. She's a photographer. She's also one of my proteges, and now training people to become photographers, because one cannot do these projects alone, and it's always best if we do it together, because there are a lot of stories that still need to be told, and there are so many people who are silenced in their different spaces. So I work with a number of individuals to make sure that we write our own visual history, in as much as oral histories becomes part of this mission, because there are people who do not want to be seen or who don't want to show their faces, and then we record those voices because we want to make sure that the South African history, you know, is textualized, if not visualized. Oh shucks. Also part of this documentation has soccer players, musicians, different people are holding different positions in our communities, because I believe that we can't only tell one story. I know that like the common stories that are told now might not be relevant for other parties, but then they are relevant for the communities themselves, especially coming from a space where you're told that it's an African to be homosexual, you're told that it's an African to be transsexual or to be transgender. And the only way that I believe we could rise above is through visualizing our lives and writing this through, you know, documentaries and also photographies, etc., etc. I just roll with the image and interact with people or respond to questions afterwards. Time is not on our side.
Yeah.
This is Lerato, who's here, who's wearing a orange beanie. Lerato is my right hand and edits most of the life stories written by the people who are contributing to the collective. And the images are taken over a period of time, which stresses the need for the relationship between the participants and the person who take photographs to undo the hierarchies that exist when you think gender, gender language, and also all that is there. What is missing in most of the visual of this visual narrative document is the local language in which we could speak and let the community or society at large to understand what gender is. The terminologies that we are using as Bantu people comes from a different space, which might be complicated for many people who are not educated to understand what gender is in my language. I speak Zulu. In Natal, where I come from, KwaZulu-Natal, where the king and the queen come from, and the president come from, people have formed or started their own language. And the gender language is called Isinqumo. And when you define a transgender person, you call that person Iqenge. And it has a lot to do with cues and queers and so on and so on. But then people have a way in which they speak to each other or relate to each other, not using these common terms that we're using when we speak of gender here, like gender non-conforming. Like my people will find their own way in which they understand each other, because that will be too complicated maybe for them, because they don't come from that academic space. So people try to negotiate spaces using their own terms. And those terms works for us. And it's a pity that those terms are not yet concretized. Because I'm coming from a space where we speak like 11 official languages. And then the queer language or the Zulu trans language becomes another extra language. Until maybe somebody formalizes it, then it will be taken as one of the official languages. You know, like one of the common terms when you define like homosexual in Zulu, which is called Ungangili or Istabane. Those are our own languages. So when thinking of like speaking at a gender conference, and I'm thinking, what language should I speak in order to negotiate my space and also to be understood becomes something else. But in all, I like to say there are a lot of these visuals, they're accessible online. There's a book. For some people who live here in New York, I had an exhibition at Brooklyn Museum, and the next exhibition will happen sometimes next year, in which I'll be specific into what gender means in my own language, for people to have an extra something to think of and also to process and to learn further about what gender is in Bantu terms. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for joining us. Well, you know, I actually want to start, I want to jump off on this idea of the visual as a language and how that interacts with other ways of producing knowledge, of producing stories. I think, you know, the images in this text existed for me as just images. And so I had to imagine the stories. And in Trans-Cuba, for example, you have these interviews that sort of get attached. And so there are the images, how they circulate and produce and speak their own language, and then there are these other sort of additional ways of telling stories, these kind of extra elements to help us know or to help us understand. But the image itself is also, if we sit with it, also trying to tell us something. And so I'm thinking about this tension between what it means to know and understand and what it means to sit with the power and the kind of mystery and the kind of emotional radiance of some of these images. And so that's, any thoughts on
Yes, I can just speak, or?
Sure.
Yeah, no, I was wondering how it worked. I always felt it was only fair to the people that I've worked with to give them a voice as well. So I have interviews in all of my books. Ideally, what I would like best is for people to look at the image and absorb them first and feel them, but then they want to know, they always want to know more. One of my problems has always been in this work is that the stories, the issues, everything is so interesting that I sometimes feel that my art gets left out of it because there are so many questions. Well, what happened to so and so, and you know, what was the story, and how come, you know, I don't have to go into it, but and then the work, the images themselves get drowned. So in a way, I'm lucky what happened today, because half of it I was narrating, and the other half you just had to look at and come up with your own thoughts about the images. So I might as well make the best out of it, right?
I mean, what do you think in terms of the impact?
Sorry.
The impact of what it means to have the images circulate alone, and then the difference of you translating them, of you providing this extra visual, the kind of textual elements. And then there's fiction. Yeah.
This then becomes political because it depends who's circulating those images and where and what for. Yeah, people are there, and unfortunately there are so many voices that are silent simply because they don't know how to tell those stories, because we live in spaces where the resources are not really for LGBTI people, which is also another politic. Circulation becomes something else, because where are the spaces, where are the museums open for the LGBTI people to showcase and speak for themselves? Are the curators within those settings ready for such content? That's the problem here. And also, how well informed are those curators within those spaces at galleries in which the LGBTI people could fend for themselves through their own visuals? So it's really political, because we can't talk circulation without thinking where to circulate those images. Or do we say that when we speak gender, it should only be academized and do not go beyond art spaces, go beyond other platforms? The biggest challenge that people are having right now, especially speaking from from South Africa, maybe I'm one of less than 50 people who are dealing with visual activism that is focused mainly on LGBTI people. And out of a population of 50 million people, saying maybe 100,000 of us identify as either LGBTI. So my worry or my issue that makes people left uneducated, that make people transphobic and homophobic, is that the visual is there, but how do we then produce this visual in order to educate members of our societies? We live in spaces where people come out every day. When people transition, they don't transition alone, they transition with their own families. But if they transition and the educators at different schools are not open-minded, it means that we are violating other people's rights. And talking about film, speaking as a person who documents on a daily basis, the catch becomes where you have all this material, which could be done by different people, but then how much do you pay for the editor? Is the local broadcast ready for this content? We find that our people's characters are played by the other, which is a problem. And then you have people mimicking a transgender body, and people are there, and it means that your story is told by the next person just to sell the product, or to sell that a series, or to sell what is called a reality show, which is not our reality. So we have a lot of issues. So distribution is something else. Who's distributing and on whose behalf, and where is that material distributed?
And I'm curious, Darren, in terms of, I mean, these texts circulate in the world. They encounter these other audiences. They live beyond whatever your initial intention for them was. And so how does the work change as it circulates? And how does your own interpretation of the work change as it circulates?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I mean, one of the things I'd like to say, besides thank you to Columbia, which I didn't say before when I got here, was just, despite the disparity of our mediums, I mean, there's so much similarity in the I mean, look, I think that our films, the films that I make with Sean, are not films that you can necessarily write a script for. If you're immersive and you're entering someone else's world, the best way to give voice to the voiceless is to ask them to speak. And with Tangerine, we're cis, white filmmakers who are tapping into a culture that we know nothing about. And the reliance on our actors, Maya and Kiki and those that surrounded them, to bring the authenticity of the language, of the fight, of the history and the world that they live in, was vital to this being a very real, honest film. And yeah, I do think that the message changes depending upon what audience sees it. I mean, we've played in different countries. We played in one of the old Russian countries, and I can't remember the name of it now, but and we won an award there, which to me was so progressive, given the current climate over there. And naturally, I mean, there's a couple of different elements of the film, the trans topic and the actual technology topic that depending upon where we're screening, offers a great opportunity for conversation on multiple levels, but usually one will encourage people to start talking about something. I especially like doing the technology based screenings, because it opens up a trans conversation where there never would have been one before.
Tangerine was famously sort of filmed on I guess 5 iPhones.
iPhone 5S, yeah. And so there's something really rich about those conversations, and the film transforms wherever it lands. So.
Well, now it is your turn. So I'd like to open it up for questions to. We've been presented with so much rich material. Yes?
Going off the conversation about language, the language that's used to describe the queer community has evolved and grown. Sorry. Pretty loud. The language used to describe the queer community has grown and evolved so much over time. So I'm really curious how that's had an impact on your work in terms of new work you're creating, and also reinterpreting previous work that you created in the past with this new language that's available to explain or identify us.
Does anyone want to?
Sure, I'll take it. The language that was used before was not ours, still not ours. Because it makes the homophobe, the transphobe, the queerphobe easy to say that what you are is adopted from the West. That's the dangerous part for us. That's what leads to so many transphobic attacks, lesbophobic attacks. That leads to so many hate crimes, because there's no simplified language that makes the ordinary people or ordinary person to get it. Thinking even like this whole acronym LGBTI. Other people are so lame in such a way that they want to have things done their way, and they say, I don't understand what is a lesbian. Like you seated in an interview and you have to dissect just the simple term, what is a lesbian, what is a transgender person. And once you said like gender, it's like it's so big, you can't even make other people get it. So the language is so complicated, complex for many people right now, because people want the Constitution simplified, accessible to all, for, you know, in all languages. They want the gender language and gender terms simplified. Maybe in that way, once people are educated, it will reduce a lot of violence. Because what makes people violent, it's through ignorance. Or it's because they're ignorant. They don't know how to deal with it. They think gender is some animal, and they don't know how to deal with it, and they don't want to get there. And we say a gay person, a homosexual person, trans, what is that? So does it mean that you have changed your sex? What do you think? And then it becomes something for preachers, you know, to indulge on a Sunday evening or afternoon in their churches, which is so unnecessary. So we're at a space where we need to simplify these terms and make sure that they're accessible to everybody. And in that way, we'll be able to negotiate different spaces, because right now it's harsh out there. And the current language, it differs. We have 9 provinces. Surely people who are in Venda, or say in Mpumalanga region, how they define the terms according to their tradition and cultures, whichever existed maybe way back, might be different. But now, somebody needs to pack it for academics, for artists, for feminists, for everybody, for all of us. So in that way, we'll know that we're speaking as a community than to speak as patches or groups and groups of people who do not listen to each other.
I think this is so important, in exactly the way you described it. When we were releasing the film, you know, again, it was something that Sean and I, we didn't know all the terminology. We didn't know, you know, I mean, we're, you know, kind of coming, you know, from nowhere, you know, on this. And, you know, and naturally we had consultants who, you know, wanted us to say the politically correct things. And you know, Sean is much different than I. He's very, you know, astute when it comes to this. And you know, sometimes I care less about political correctness. I just want to speak about the issues. And I didn't realize when we got out there that we would be challenged on some of that. And I think it was actually our actor, James Ransone, who said, you know, I don't think we're at a stage yet where we can start fighting over words, you know, and you know, we need to focus on the issues, and then we get there, you know, however we get there. But you know, it's a distraction frequently, you know, if there are so many, you know, conversations to this, you know, and I think that you know, and maybe I'm oversimplifying things. I don't know, but.
I don't see how you could be simplifying things, because it has gotten so complicated and so fragile. I mean, people can be offended so easily if you use the wrong word. And so you have to be sort of on pins and needles to make even, but one thing I do like about all this is that people are self-defining rather than being defined from the outside by so-called experts. You know, people have decided within themselves how they want to define. So it has that side too.
Hi, my question is mostly for Zanele, but I think it might speak to the rest of the panel in other ways. I'm really interested in the way in which you talk about the politics of representation, about consent, and about the lack of control one has over a piece of work once it's being circulated by people who may or may not know what to do with it. And I think that's something that many of us think about. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit, and I kind of have a two-part question. Now your work is being displayed and collected globally, right? So now people are coming into galleries, and there are images from your work that are being kind of absorbed into culture in a way that becomes disconnected from you and disconnected from your community. And I'm wondering sort of how your participants feel about that. And in a connected way, much of your recent work is self-portraiture. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between those two things, and then how you feel about these images of you now circulating in this way. So I was hoping you could speak to that a little bit.
When I started, I didn't know that will end up in any gallery space or museums. I was just frustrated, and I needed to speak out, and I was tired of being defined by other people. So what I have done to make sure that it's fair for everybody, a percentage of my earnings goes back to the community. Most of my projects are not funded by the government. So if a photo is sold, so 50% goes back. People get education. Those who want to further their studies, they know where they are. People are sent back to school to study photography. I have groomed a lot of photographers, and I'm happy if I don't wake up tomorrow, at least people will carry on producing these images. And at home, when there are exhibitions, nothing is hidden under anything. The communities, they come to the galleries and see themselves, and also get to read and understand what these galleries are all about. Because prior to '94, I mean, galleries were not for black people, you know. It was very rare that you find a lot of black people being in those spaces where they could see themselves, you know, because it plays, also it's like one of those things where you think, it's either the image is shown there or somebody's essay is published in some gender journal where the people who are written about can't even understand what you have dissected and cited and defined and redefined, because then it doesn't become what it was originally when it was taken from the informant or whoever that responded to your question or to your dissertation. So it's just becomes something else. So for me, I'm trying to make sure that whatever images that I produce belong to the community. So if you look at any of these images, they are not for me, they are for us. If I shut down, and it means that another next person decides I'm not going to do this because I don't want to be in any gallery space, in any museum, where are you going to showcase that work? Activist spaces do not have such platforms that the galleries and the museums have. Do we speak to us as LGBTI people, or do we speak to the masses? Do we mainstream our issues, or we keep it to ourselves? And that space for ourselves, is it conducive enough for the people who might not understand the issues to be educated? So that on its own is complicated, but distribution and mainstreaming our issues become key to me, and make sure that people get some sense of what is going on, because before then we had no understanding what was going on. And then the issue of my portrait, I've been taking photos of other people for too long. I've forgotten about me. I have my own personal issues that if maybe not handled with care, I might end up being something else. So I don't have any other fix except photography. I don't smoke, I don't drink. So the only thing that I know how to do is to take photographs. So for once in my life, I have turned the camera and look at me and deal with my own personal issues, my own personal agenda, because I don't have any therapist, no shrink, I just deal with me. And the Black series simply deals with racism. And there's a thin line between racism and the phobias that my people are experiencing on a daily basis. You know, so it's the Black series, it's called Somnyama Ngonyama. I indulge. For those who are on Instagram, I'm there, no pseudonym. You get to see the work. Due to time limits, I couldn't share that. But the images are a way in which I speak about racism that I encounter on a daily basis. As I check in at the hotel, I have to declare. As I walk into a space and take a seat in any aeroplane, I have to become the next person. And also my issue of being feminized is just something else. You know, I don't like the ma'am, madam, miss, and so on. And I got to the hotel, I was miss, this and that, can we confirm this, which irritated me. So I'm dealing with a lot of prejudice on a daily basis. And then Somnyama Ngonyama is a way in which I reference different cases in history that displaces a black body within those settings. So it's accessible online, and the project is called Somnyama Ngonyama, and the book will be out next year, New York spring. Yeah.
We have time for one.
Thank you for the whole panel, but I am particularly interested in in Muholi work in relation to how the visual culture could be appropriated by people and construct some sort of resistances against gender norms and so on. I understand that is a way of producing resistance and agency through art. But I have a curiosity. Most of the photographs, they were pretty serious faces, and I wonder if that was a sort of a mockery of the seriousness of gender.
By my surname. Thank you. Like it. The seriousness, it's not funny to be LGBTI person in South Africa today. There's a difference between images like your graduation photos and the snapshots, party photos, and the images that are taken randomly. So we are all in a mission here. We're confronting the issues, we are talking back, we are looking back, we're confronting the viewer who doesn't want to give us a space to speak out because we're speaking from a point or a space of silence. So we are undoing all the silences and invisibility of the past. So when people are standing in front of a camera, they're penetrating the lens, and that lens could be the viewer looking back at them and wondering what is going on to this person. You're obviously curious, you want to know what's going on. And surely by looking at each and every face, you're curious. And that curiosity leads to something else. And it is through these visuals in which you as the viewer, you ask yourself a question, what is going on here? Right now people are being killed. Right now, maybe as we speak, somebody is being curatively raped because of her sexuality, because of her gender expression. It is harsh out there. It's not the same like the Constitution that you quote or cite or extract for your academic paper. People are being violated as we speak, which clashes with the Constitution that we have.
Now, I think we are going to move this discussion to the reception, but first I want to have you all join me in thanking these amazing panelists.